Hello everyone, I am Demented Kirby, and welcome to my channel, the Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck techs. This episode of the Brewery is a New Year's special episode. In honor of the new year, I went through the exercise of asking myself, what if, just as the year begins new, the ban lists were also to begin anew? Therefore, I brewed a deck containing only cards banned in Commander format, and a basic land. Which is why Nira Hellkite Duelist is at the helm in order to include them all. I know you can't use any of these cards in Commander, but please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing any cards for your future decks. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. Other ways you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. Patrons get early access to scheduled videos on YouTube, and higher tier patrons get access to my Discord server as well. You can find a link to that down in the description. In fact, patrons got a chance to see this video earlier. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Nira Hellkite Duelist is a 6/6 dragon with flash, flying, trample, and haste for Wooburg. This makes Nira quite the beater, and by pumping its power by just 1, it becomes a 3-turn clock. However, winning via commander damage is not the only benefit to having Nira in the command zone. It has an ability that triggers when it enters the battlefield. When it does, the next time you would lose the game that turn, you instead draw 3 cards and your life becomes 5. This is a crazy ability. It won't prevent getting milled, dying to infect, commander damage, or an opponent's I win effects, but it prevents you from losing to you lose effects as well as combat damage. Therefore, it might be wise to keep Nira in the command zone as a way to prevent losing the game. Or you can risk it for the biscuit and use Nira as a win con. Since the challenge for brewing this deck was to include all cards banned in Commander and see if it can work, silver bordered cards and mystery booster test cards could have been considered due to them being banned. However, I limited myself only to black bordered cards. Therefore, with the exception of only a few conspiracies and heroes because of how they work, this deck contains all cards banned in Commander. How do the conspiracies and heroes work in this deck? Well, conspiracies start the game in your command zone and heroes start the game on your battlefield. For more information on how hero cards work, you can follow the link above, or I explain them in another video. These cards are never in your library and aren't considered part of your deck for purposes of meeting minimum deck requirements. However, this isn't the case for anti cards. The deck includes all 9 cards with anti. These are part of the deck but must be removed if not playing for anti. Therefore, including these cards reduces your library by 9 at the start of the game if not playing for anti. In order to take further advantage of that, the deck also includes Advantageous Proclamation, which reduces your minimum deck size by 5. This means that your deck has 95 cards instead. However, all cards included, this deck technically contains 134 cards. Thanks to removing the anti-cards at the beginning of the game, your library will begin with 85 cards. At least this provides some ease in playing with the deck since there isn't any inherent synergy or cohesion in the deck. Keep in mind that the challenge is to try and play with all banned cards and make it work. So starting with 15 less cards in the library makes it easier to draw into some potential combos. As if beginning the game with 14 less cards in the deck weren't enough, the conspiracies and heroes also give advantage as the game begins, similarly to ley lines. The Slayer has a start with 47 life, and the Vanquisher increases our starting hand. We also get advantage thanks to backup plan and power play. The former essentially gives us a free mulligan since we draw 2 hands and choose one of them before doing any actual mulligans. The latter has a start the game, so there's no need to randomize the starting player. This might seem like the mother of all advantages, but besides 3 non-basic lands, the rest of the deck is just basic lands, so we're going to need all the help we can get. As for the rest of the heroes and conspiracies, I'll discuss them as they become relevant. Now that I mentioned the lands, the best mana advantage cards are banned in Commander, like Fast Bond. Since this format has a starting life of 40, Fast Bond is ridiculous here. We're basically able to play an additional land after the first one for 1 life each. If that weren't enough, you can combo it with limited resources. Getting both of these in your opening hand with 5 lands has the potential of severely limiting how many lands your opponents would be able to play for the rest of the game. You basically drop a forest, then cast Fast Bond. Then you drop a plains and cast limited resources. Then you drop 3 more lands. If you're then able to draw into more lands faster than opponents can play theirs, you could have an incredibly fast, far land advantage. Then, once the 10th land hits the table, no one else can play any lands. Even then, we can still generate mana because we're running Mox Emerald, Mox Jet, Mox Pearl, Mox Ruby, and Mox Sapphire. Not to be outdone, Black Lotus is also present here. These mana rocks bypass limited resources, so we're good once the land limit has been reached. If we want to be especially evil, we can still get our lands with Sylvan Primordial. When it enters the battlefield, we can destroy a land for each of our opponents and then get 3 forests and put them onto the battlefield. That maintains the 10 land limit. It simply shifts it further in our favor. However, Sylvan Primordial is still amazing on its own. It can get rid of 3 non-creature permanents on the battlefield, and we get to ramp for 3 forests. There's no doubt as to why it's banned. Sundering Titan has a similar effect by destroying lands. We just have to be careful because if opponents don't possess each land type amongst themselves, we'd have to blow up our own lands as well. But I'll discuss this deck's removal effects later on. Primeval Titan is another way to ramp for lands, but isn't restricted to basic lands. Since the lands it's ramping when it enters the battlefield or attacks are put straight onto the battlefield, they don't count as being played, so they bypass limited resources land limit also. On its own is just a broken card, a 6/6 trampler for 6 mana that's basically ramping every turn, including the turn it enters the battlefield, is just crazy. Rofellos Llanowar Emissary is another creature-based mana advantage card. This mana dork is so epic it's the only one banned in Commander. Rofellos is incredibly cheap to cast and he basically taps for a ridiculous amount of mana. Since this deck contains 7 basic forests, he can potentially tap for 7 green mana if we're able to have them all out. Similarly, Tolarian Academy can also tap for a bunch of mana, but only if you have a bunch of artifacts in play. This deck only runs 16 artifacts, but fortunately we start the game with 5 already on the battlefield, one of which is Axe of the Warmonger. Hero equipments are artifact hero cards you can enhance when completing the Forge a Godslayer challenge from the first Theros block. In this case, I chose to enhance Axe of the Warmonger with this sticker, allowing me to untap 2 lands whenever the creature it's equipped to deals combat damage. When equipped to a creature like Primeval Titan, it'll untap the 2 lands that it ramped upon attacking. Now that I mention it, the Explorer is another hero card that helps with accelerating the deck. Since we start the game with it on the battlefield, we're able to play an additional land each turn since turn 1. Other aids we have since the beginning of the game are Brago's Favor and Secrets of Paradise. Brago's Favor allows us to cast a name spell for 1 generic less. In this case, I'll probably always choose Nira as my spell in order to bypass the commander tax by at least 1. Secrets of Paradise just makes it so that any creature you choose will be able to tap for any color of mana. Since Braid's Cabal minion is the weakest creature in the deck, I usually choose her to be my Birds of Paradise. Other ways to play with mana and casting costs is Emissary's Ploy and Unexpected Potential. Emissary's Ploy is a great help since 92% of the deck is basic lands. The deck has 3 1-costed spells, 8 2-costed spells, and 6 3-costed spells. Since it's more likely to draw a 2-costed spell, I'd probably choose 2 more often than not for Emissary's Ploy. However, if we secretly name Nira with Unexpected Potential, we're able to pay its casting cost with any colored mana. This is incredibly important since Nira costs Wooburg in a deck that basically only contains basic lands. Even then, out of all of these spells and cards and effects mentioned, they pale in comparison to Channel. Again, starting with 40 life is self-explanatory as to why this card is banned in Commander. For just 2 green mana, you can spend life as it were colorless mana until end of turn. Now, the deck may not run Fireball, but there are a couple of goodies in here that can definitely take advantage of Channel. One of those being Emrakul the Aeon's Torn. Emrakul the Aeon's Torn is the only Eldrazi Titan banned in Commander, and for good reason. She can't be countered, and when you cast her, you take an extra turn. And that's just on the stack. Once she resolves and enters the battlefield, she's a 15/15 flyer with Annihilator 6 and protection from colored spells. Suffice it to say, it's quite the beater. And if that weren't enough, when she gets put into your graveyard from anywhere, you shuffle your entire graveyard back into your library. If you're able to hardcast Emrakul each turn, then you can get infinite turns off of Karakas. Using Karakas to return Emrakul to your hand each turn you cast it will give you infinite turns if left unanswered. You can also use Karakas to bounce back any other legendary creature you control to take more advantage of them, like our commander, in order to avoid losing the game. However, you can also use Karakas against opponents. You can essentially prevent an opponent's commander from staying on the board long enough to matter. Emrakul isn't even the only extra turn effect in this deck. Time Walk, one of the 8 Power 9 cards banned in Commander, is an extra turn spell for just 2 mana, and that's not even the craziest part of it. Since Panoptic Mirror is banned in Commander, that means that it's in this deck. Imprinting Time Walk on Panoptic Mirror gives us infinite turns if not dealt with. Time Vault is the final extra turn effect in the deck, and it also costs 2 mana to cast. Unfortunately, it enters the battlefield tapped and doesn't untap during your untap step. You have to skip a turn in order to untap it. However, thankfully, Paradox Engine is banned. Wow, I never thought I'd actually say that out loud. Thanks to Paradox Engine, you can also take a bunch of extra turns. Every spell you cast will untap Time Vault, and then you can tap it again to take an extra turn. It's also incredibly easy to get Paradox Engine thanks to the champion. You can pay 2, tap it, and exile it to search your library for a legendary non-creature artifact and put it onto the battlefield. Paradox Engine is the only legendary non-creature artifact in the deck, so basically the champion has you start the game with Paradox Engine on the battlefield. Recall that the Explorer also starts off on the battlefield, so you drop 2 lands that first turn. You can then pay for the champion's ability and get that guaranteed turn 1 Paradox Engine every single game. Oh, and it goes without saying that Emrakul isn't the only beater in the deck either. She's just a huge beater with a built-in time walk. But the deck also includes 1996 World Champion. This creature's power and toughness are equal to chosen opponents. However, what makes him even more epic is that you can tutor for him without any other card. He has a built-in ability that lets you tutor for him if he's in your library. You have to discard your hand and you can only use this in the beginning of your upkeep, but with an empty hand and the mana to cast it, it's worth doing. You can also use this as a way to discard your hand. For example, if Emrakul is in your hand, then you can activate 1996 World Champion to discard your hand with Emrakul in it in order to shuffle your graveyard into your library. You can also use his discard ability to abuse cards like Recurring Nightmare. You can use this to reanimate any creature card in your graveyard in order to cheat it into play. Unfortunately, you can't use it to reanimate Emrakul in response to it entering the graveyard, since it can only be activated at sorcery speed. At least it can be used to send Nira back to the command zone by sacrificing it. Once 1996 World Champion hits the battlefield, it'll definitely make sweat the opponent you choose as its nemesis. Oh, and it has Shroud too. For more info on 1996 World Champion, check out the video in the link above. The deck also runs the other one card only in existence card, Shishifukujin Dragon. Unfortunately, it's not as good as 1996 World Champion and it's uncomfortable to cast. It's also a 7/7 without any relevant abilities for 9 mana. Unfortunately, this deck doesn't have ways to take advantage of its +1/+1 counters, whether by doubling them, moving them, etc. That being said, it's at least a good mana sink for red mana. You pay 3 red mana and remove 2 +1/+1 counters on it in order to put 3 +1/+1 counters on it at the end of your turn. Keep in mind that you have to use its ability at sorcery speed though. Another beater in the deck is Optimus Prime Inspiring Leader. Unfortunately, there aren't any double-faced cards in the deck nor creatures with morph. That being said, it's still a 4/5 for 5 mana. However, for 1 generic mana, you can make it into a 6/6 with Trample. Another beater in the deck is Soul Advocate Eternal. It's a 4/4 flyer with Vigilance. If Soul would have been in the command zone with a partner, then its teamwork ability would trigger when you attack with both it and its partner. However, this isn't as good as having a failsafe against losing in the command zone thanks to Nira. The rest of the beaters in the deck also have other functions, so we'll see them later on. That being said, not every creature has to be a beater. The deck does have ways to give boons to creatures in order to make them more dangerous. One such boon is giving flash to all of our creature spells with Prophet of Krufix. Notwithstanding, you also untap all your lands each untap step with it, meaning that it's even easier to cast your creatures to have them ready for when your turn comes along. And how do we make them even more dangerous? Well, let's start with the free ones. Cloak of the Philosopher, Lash of the Tyrant, and Spear of the General. These are hero equipment you put on the battlefield at the start of the game. However, I'd find that they're more optimal when having the following enhancement stickers placed on them. They still cost 2 generic to equip, but at least they're free to have in play. The Avenger, the Hunter, and the Warrior are heroes that can give a boon to a creature. Having these on the start of the battlefield is definitely quite the advantage. These aren't the only boon granting heroes either. The General, the Provider, and the Warmonger each give boons as well, but require being exiled in order to do so. As an added bonus, the Provider gains us life. The other 2 heroes should be taken advantage of when we need that extra push to take an opponent out of the game, or maybe multiple opponents, since the deck does have ways of creating tokens, which we'll see soon enough. Incendiary Descent, Mucios Preparations, and Natural Unity are the 3 conspiracies I would secretly name Nira with. Incendiary Descent gives it fire breathing, which is not only a great mana sink, but also a way to potentially one-shot an opponent out of the game in fewer turns. Mucios Preparations has Nira enter the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it, making it a 7/7 and thus becoming a 3-turn clock. Natural Unity is also a great way to make Nira bigger in order to end the game even quicker. Adriana's Valor and Immediate Action start the game face down in your command zone. You have to name a creature, which can probably be written down on a post-it note, on the card, or maybe a small piece of paper in the sleeve, or whatever you do, as you do. Then you can reveal that conspiracy at any time. While it might be tempting to choose Nira for Adriana's Valor, I'd rather Nira be able to die in combat. That way I can recast it later on if I were to lose the game further along. The creature I'd choose with these 2 conspiracies is 1996 World Champion. These effects bypass Shroud, so it's an effective way of giving him haste and indestructible. Another great choice for Adriana's Valor and immediate action is Gristle Brand. As mentioned earlier, the other beaters in the deck serve other functions and Gristle Brand is no exception. This 7/7 flyer with lifelink is banned and for good reason. You can pay 7 life to draw 7 cards. With a starting life of 40, you could cheat this into play and potentially draw 35 cards without dying to life loss. However, he costs a whopping 8 mana to cast, 4 of which is black. Fortunately, he isn't the only way to draw cards in the deck. The last of the banned Power 9 cards in the deck is Ancestral Recall. 3 cards at instant speed for just 1 mana and no drawbacks shows how much balancing Magic needed during its inception. That being said, this card can be abused even further. Secretly naming it with Double Stroke allows you to copy it when you cast it, effectively drawing you 6 cards for 1 mana. Not to be outdone, if you secretly name it with Iterative Analysis, Ancestral Recall will draw you 7 cards at instant speed for just 1 blue mana. Crazy. Another way to draw 7 cards is with Sway of the Stars. However, Sway of the Stars basically resets the game, but leaves everyone with just 7 life. So if the game is dragging on too long, this will definitely fast forward it. Keep in mind that you'd have to shuffle in your hero cards as well. If you draw into them, they're not spells so you can't cast them, so it'll effectively take away your heroes. At least you keep your conspiracies since those are in the command zone. But at least Sway of the Stars is a good way to deal with opponents that have too much life or have graveyard dependent strategies. Now if you really want to draw cards, look no further than Yawgmoth's Bargain. This card was meant to fix Necropotence. However, it's even more broken than Necropotence. It's literally only legal in Vintage. Basically, you pay 1 life to draw 1 card, and that's it. So it's a cheaper Gristle Brand on an enchantment and without having to go 7 at a time. With life as a resource, it's very easy to draw into a ton of cards thanks to it. You can also potentially draw into a ton of cards with Trade Secrets. A great political card, you can conspire with an opponent in order for both of you to draw into a bunch of cards. So maybe you gang up against the arch enemy. The rest of the draw effects in the deck are slow in comparison, but they're still good. Library of Alexandria is Power 9 level good. Not only does it tap for mana, but if you have 7 cards in your hand, you can tap it to draw a card. With so many ways to keep our hand full of cards, we can pretty much always have 7 cards in it. Secretly naming a creature with flying for Hired Heist is a great way to draw cards too. You can choose to reveal Hired Heist before the creature deals combat damage in order to at least have the first time be a surprise. For just 1 blue mana each time that named creature deals combat damage is a great deal. The Harvester and Inzerva, Master of Insights, draw by looting. The Harvester starts on the battlefield, so it's a great way to discard lands you don't need in order to dig deeper into the deck. Inzerva is a better looter since we draw 2 but only discard 1 with its first ability. Its second ability lets us scry 2 to everyone's library. Its ultimate can be achieved the same turn it enters the battlefield, and it's pretty brutal. We essentially get an emblem that's a combination of telepathy and underworld dreams. What's great about Inzerva is that it's so easy to cast since you can potentially cast it for 5 generic mana if you don't have the colors, which is great for this deck. Drawing isn't the only way to gain card advantage in the deck either. Similar to the champion, we can also tutor for things in our library. With Gifts Ungiven, we can search our library for 4 cards with different names. We then have an opponent choose 2 of them to put into our hands while the other 2 go to the graveyard. This is a great political tool. We can use this to accumulate a favor with an opponent or to have an opponent pay back a favor. We can also use this to team up with an opponent against another opponent. Summoner's Bond is another way to tutor through our deck. Since we secretly name 2 creatures, this allows for assembling a combo. However, since this isn't technically a constructed deck, we won't be able to abuse Summoner's Bond. That being said, if we name Nira as one of the creatures, then anytime we cast our commander, we can tutor for the other creature chosen in the deck. All the creatures in the deck are so good, but I'd go with Braid's Cabal Minion. Since you have to sacrifice an artifact, creature, or land during your upkeep, you can just sacrifice Nira in order to be able to recast it again from the command zone later on in case you were to lose the game. But then again, there's just so many creatures in the deck that you can't go wrong with any of them paired to Nira or any combination of them independent of it. Other ways of tutoring through the deck actually have us cheating things into play from the library. Tinker has us sacrifice an artifact in order to cheat any artifact in our library onto the battlefield. Unfortunately, this deck doesn't run Blightsteel Colossus, but we can still use it to cheat in Time Vault or Panoptic Mirror. Moto the Gnarled Oracle is also a way to change one card into another. Basically, Moto is a one-sided Momorvik Vanguard. You pay X and discard a card to have target player reveal cards from the top of their library until they reveal a creature card with converted mana cost X or less. You can use this with X equals 0 to see the entirety of an opponent's deck. If you're lucky enough, then you can snag a zero-costed creature. However, if used with our own deck, then you can cheat into play any of the bombs in the deck or any of the other cards that really disrupt opponents. This is especially useful since X is a generic cost and we can play with any of the mana from our basic lands. The Legend of Arena creates wizards that help decrease the generic mana cost of the spells you cast that turn. However, it's its final ability that searches through our library for a Planeswalker card and puts it directly onto the battlefield. And, to top it off, that Planeswalker gets an additional amount of loyalty counters equal to the amount of wizard you have on the battlefield. The deck only has 3 Planeswalkers, so this is a good way to cheat them into play, especially in Zerva. That way you can ultimate it without losing it as a state-based action. On the topic of tokens, the Legend of Arena isn't the only token creator in the deck. There's also Chandra Gremlin Wrangler and Dungeon Master. Chandra costs 4 but has a starting loyalty of 3 and can create a blocker for 2 loyalty counters. So that first turn she'll have 5 loyalty counters while having a chump blocker. With enough gremlins, you can use her second ability to burn any target for that amount. Dungeon Master creates a token for an opponent where if it dies, every other player gains 2 life. However, its ultimate ability is what gives us a bunch of tokens. We get 4 different creature tokens as an adventuring party. I'm surprised he didn't also create a green rogue with reach, but I digress. His second ability has the potential to draw us a card, but it has a 5% chance of having us skip our next turn. Hold the Perimeter and Sentinel Dispatch are conspiracies that have us essentially start the game with a token. With all the cards we'll be starting the game with, we're definitely going to be the arch enemy, so it's good to start with a couple of blockers. Hold the Perimeter gives our opponents a 1/1 goblin that can block, but at least our soldier is a 1/2. We also start the game with the Protector on the battlefield, so that's another way to deal with the goblins we gave out. Assemble the Rank and File is another conspiracy that can create a token. I'd go with secretly naming Nira, since it's the creature that will most be dying in order to return to the command zone. That way, it can at least give you a 2/2 zombie each time it does for just 1 black mana. On its own, Bow of the Hunter doesn't create a token. However, with the following enhancement sticker, it does. This basically makes it so whenever you tap the equipped creature, you create a soldier token at instant speed. Diabolical Salvation also creates tokens at instant speed, but since it has split second, it can't be responded to. You can only use special actions like Morph, Megamorph, and Manifest. These tokens are basically 16 damage for 6 mana if they manage to get through. If that weren't enough, they create treasure tokens when they die. You can also secretly name this for Double Stroke in order to copy it and make 32 potential damage for just 6 mana. Exiling the General and the Warmonger will definitely make those tokens even more painful. The final token creator in the deck is Karis and the Beholder. A bit uncomfortable to cast in a 5-colored deck, they're still a 1/20 for just 5 mana. They also create a human token whenever they enter the battlefield as well as at the beginning of your upkeep. Not only that, but you make a charisma check when you create the token. You roll a d20 and if the result plus the number of creatures you control is greater than 11, you put a +1/+1 counter on all of your creatures. But if you roll a 20 on that die, you create a token that's a copy of each non-legendary creature you control. That's insane, but unfortunately 73% of the creatures in the deck are legendary. So what other creatures does the deck contain? Well, they play a role in the control aspects of the deck. Iona Shield of Emeria cranks the salt factor up to 11, especially for monocolored decks. You can use her to lock a monocolored deck out of the game, or use her to stop opponents from playing black or blue spells, since these are the most common colors for removal and counter magic. Speaking of counter magic, Arayo Soratami Ascendant can flip into Arayo's Essence when the 4th spell of a turn is cast. Once in its enchantment form, it counters the first spell cast each turn by an opponent for free. Another way to be bothersome to opponents is with Leovold, Emissary of Trest. Unfortunately, the deck doesn't contain any of the cards that made Leovold ban-worthy, but at least on his own he can stop opponents from drawing more than 1 card each turn. Also, if any of our permanents were to be targeted by a spell or an ability controlled by an opponent, we draw a card. He's also a 3/3 for 3 mana, so he's still a good card. You can also disrupt opponents by tapping down their creatures with the Philosopher, the Savant, and Falling Star. The Philosopher is good to tap down a potential Fatty or Voltron commander coming our way. Falling Star is a dexterity card that requires you flip it onto the table from a height of at least 1 foot. Any creatures it lands on receives 3 damage, and if they survive are tapped. However, the best one is the Savant. It's great for closing out a game. Since it taps down all of their creatures, you can swing in for the kill. Since they don't untap during their next untap step, you don't have to kill off all opponents at once. Maybe the one who survives can be taken out the next turn. The Tyrant is great at eliminating weenie token strategies, which has the potential of getting rid of masses of chump blockers on our opponent's side. Other ways of disrupting opponents by getting rid of their things is with Chaos Orb. If you're skilled enough, as well as lucky enough, you can potentially take out multiple non-token permanents with it. These dexterity cards are at least fun to try since it gives a different dimension to games. These kinds of effects are now solely placed on silver bordered cards, but at least Chaos Orb and Falling Star were the originators. Now, if we want to get rid of absolutely everything, then count on Upheaval, World Fire, and the previously mentioned Sway of the Stars. Upheaval returns all permanents to their controller's hands. Again, keep in mind that you won't be able to use your hero cards afterwards. World Fire is even more evil since it straight up exiles everything except libraries and command zones. If you leave enough mana open after casting it, you can cast Nira afterwards in order to take out the table one at a time. Balance is true to its namesake and leaves each player with the same amount of lands, creatures, and cards in hand as the players with the fewest of each. Since they are sacrificed, it bypasses Indestructible. Another way to have players sacrifice things is with the previously mentioned Braids Cabal minion. If we have a way to create a token during each of our turns, we can just sacrifice that to Braids. If an opponent doesn't have that luxury, then they'll slowly end up sacrificing their artifacts, creatures, and lands if Braids is left out long enough. Now, if you really want to disrupt the game to a point where everyone might scoop, cast Shahrazad. This sorcery is banned everywhere and for good reason. It makes games last twice as long. I'd say use this only if you want to troll the table, but even then I'd say it's best to read the room first. Even then you might not even win the sub-game, and anyone who doesn't win the sub-game loses half their life rounded up. Now that I mentioned winning the game, the deck contains Coalition Victory. This card might require a couple of hoops to jump through, and it costs a whopping 8 mana to cast, but if you meet the conditions, you win the game and that's it. Our commander is a 5-colored creature, and the deck also contains 1996 World Champion, which is a 5-colored creature. Additionally, the deck contains enough basic lands in order for us to comply with the basic land type clause as well. Although not as straightforward as Coalition Victory, Biorhythm also has the potential to win us the game. Another 8-costed spell, if you cast this with the appropriate board state, you can win the game if opponents don't have any creatures in play. Even if they do have a couple of creatures on the battlefield, their life totals become that amount, which puts them into killing range with Nira or Gristle Brand or Iona, etc. This brew was definitely an interesting challenge. Although all I had to do was include all of the black bordered cards that are banned in Commander, the deck still needs to work. So the challenge was in taking these cards and analyzing them in such a way as to be able to pilot a somewhat functional deck. Granted, it includes cards that no one will be able to play with anyways, like the celebration cards such as 1996 World Champion, Shichifukuchin Dragon, and the Heroes of the Realm promos. I also included the hero cards even though they're not technically cards, because I felt like it'd be fun to see how they'd also interact in the deck while also making it easier to play with the deck. Including them in a deck of banned cards is more bending the rules more so and less breaking the rules since they're not technically legal in Commander. Even though the deck does contain some powerful combos, all things considering, there's no way to protect them, so they're easy to disrupt. So I don't think this deck can defeat an optimized or competitive deck that doesn't have any self-imposed restrictions. But it does contain some seriously powerful cards, so it remains to be seen how it'd fare against casual and janky decks. I have lots of ideas for this channel, but I don't want to spoil anything just yet. If you're interested in this deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the Brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am Demented Kirby, happy brewing and happy new year.